Yeah, my name is Dave Holmes, and I am the programs manager of the Midwest office of Candid. And if you don't know what Candid is, you may know us as the Foundation Center. We were the Foundation Center up until about 2 years ago when we merged with GuideStar. And so what we do is collect information on the world of nonprofits and philanthropy. So we teach classes on how to write grants and how to find grants, grant opportunities, and also now how to share information about your nonprofit the most effective manner through GuideStar. So you can get the word out to donor advised funds and individual donors. And you can also find grant opportunities and use our resources to help with that. So I'll encourage you to visit our candid.org website. What we do with starting nonprofits is tend to talk about the mechanics of this and what you need to think about if you're going through the process. And so we get a lot of people who get in contact with us or send us an email or call us up and want to find out about the process. So I'm going to be taking you through that. And Alex is here. He's going to be talking about the legal elements. So I'll ask Alex to take from here.
Thanks, Dave. And thanks everyone for joining us today. So again, Alex Campbell, I'm a partner at the Cleveland-based firm Schneider, Smeltz, Spieth, Bell. My practice is focused on serving nonprofit organizations. I've actually my entire private practice career have been in this sort of niche within a niche. And so I do outside general counsel work, corporate governance, tax questions, contracting questions. And I get a lot of questions about starting nonprofit organizations. And so we'll talk a little bit about what does that mean? What kinds of questions should you be asking yourself? And roughly speaking, the presentation today will be structured with the beginning, my portion, talking about the mechanics. What does it mean to be a nonprofit organization? What does it mean to be a tax-exempt 501c3 organization? And then Dave, I'll turn it over to Dave, who will talk about the kinds of organizational questions and other kinds of questions that you should be asking yourself to decide whether it makes sense for your initiative, your idea. So we'll talk structure first and then give you a framework. We're not going to make a decision for you. We're not here to tell you should or should not start a nonprofit organization. I think the goal is that you take away a toolkit by which that decision can be made.
And I'll be sharing at the end a resource that we have through Candid that can help you make that decision if you are in the beginning stages, or even if you've moved forward and become a 501c3. It helps answer some of the most essential questions. But I'm going to start by having Alex talk about the legal elements here.
Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about sort of definitional things here, and we'll lay the groundwork for what we're talking about. So there are really there's a bit of a misnomer here, and even in the title of this slide, because there's really two different bodies of law that come into play here as they relate to forming a new nonprofit organization and then seeking 501c3 status. The nonprofit corporation, most commonly used nonprofit form here in Ohio and around the country, is a creature of state law. So you file articles of incorporation with the Secretary of State of Ohio, and you become a nonprofit corporation. So that's step one. And again, that's a state law function. And then simply by becoming a nonprofit corporation in the state of Ohio does not automatically make you tax exempt, does not automatically make you a 501c3 organization. So that is a separate step, which we'll talk about in a second. But so most of the time, it's kind of like a rectangle and a square. Most of the time, nonprofit corporations are also 501c3s, but not always. So we'll talk about how you get there from nonprofit corporation to 501c3 status. And there's all kinds of other nonprofit organizations. There's taxable nonprofit organizations. There's 501c4s, 501c6s, 501c7s, all the way to, I think there's 527 organizations, political organizations. We're not going to talk about most of those today. We're talking about your typical nonprofit corporation, which is a public charity recognized under 501c3. So the baseline rules for a tax exempt organization, 501c3 organization, is that the organization is organized and operated exclusively for one or more charitable purposes. And charitable actually is charitable, educational, religious, animal welfare, testing, product safety testing. And so most of the organizations, especially organizations that are arts oriented, would be educational, some combination of educational and charitable. There's also, again, religious and other categories as well. Another fundamental bedrock principle is that the organization has to be the organization's revenue and assets can't be used to benefit private individuals. And what that means in practice, so the rule of the 501c3, actually the statute says that it has to be organized exclusively for a public benefit. And what that means is that the organization cannot be, essentially that the organization's money doesn't go to its shareholders. To the extent the organization makes money, I want to be very clear, nonprofit corporation can, and indeed should, often make more money than it spends. And that is not what the nonprofit corporation status imposes. The nonprofit corporation status says that you can't then distribute that profit to the shareholders. There are no shareholders of a nonprofit corporation. And so you can also pay employees, you can pay vendors, you can do all kinds of things that seem like there's a benefit to a private individual, and the overriding principle is that the organization's assets have to be used primarily for that charitable purpose, primarily for that public purpose, and any payment to a private individual, any private benefit is incidental, using the IRS terminology, incidental to that public benefit. Another bedrock principle is that the organization, 501c3 organization, cannot participate in political activities. So that is essentially advocating for or against the election of an individual to elected office. And that ranges anywhere from like the local school board all the way up to the president of the United States. And then the organization can't engage in a substantial amount of lobbying activity. So, and that's the influencing legislation language here. And so it is important to note that political activity is a no-go. Lobbying activity, you are allowed to participate in the legislative process as an organization to a point. And that could be a presentation unto itself. But for purposes of our conversation today, that's the takeaway, is that lobbying activity, and oftentimes we get clients that are confused about that because they think, well, you definitely can't participate in any of it. And that's not the case. Dave, you can go to the next slide. Okay, so here's one slide worth of information on a process that can take, if you're moving as fast as possible, a couple months. And most of that's waiting for the IRS. We'll get to that in a moment. But this is a very regimented process. And so the first thing you do, as I said, you create your nonprofit corporation. You file your articles of incorporation with the Secretary of State. Once those articles are approved, then so then here you are as of April 13th. You have your organization. It's on the books of the Secretary of State. The next thing that you'll do is you'll have, we have it here as number 4. You'll apply for an EIN. That's an online application. Typically, online application happens in a day. You have somebody as a responsible party. Simple process. Now the IRS you're officially on the IRS's radar, having filed that EIN application. So once you do that, then the incorporator, whether it's an attorney or somebody involved with the organization, sets the first official board meeting. First official board meeting can be in person, it can be via Zoom, it can be via phone, and you can actually have an action without a meeting, which means that you have a consent action. We won't get into all the details of what that means, but there's a couple different ways you can have your first initial board meeting. That first initial board meeting, I was just working on initial board minutes for a client this morning. So we implement the board, we set the officers. So in Ohio, you have to have a president, you have to have a treasurer, you have to have a secretary. You can have a vice president, you're not required to. You can have a chairperson, you're not required to. And then you also approve initial corporate policies. The two most important documents at this early stage is the Code of Regulations, which is also known in other states as bylaws, which is really the rules of the road. What does it mean to be, how often does the organization's board have to meet? All kinds of baseline rules for the organization. And then a conflict of interest policy, which defines what a conflict of interest is as to the organization, and then also how does the organization manage that conflict of interest. Okay, and having applied or having approved those documents, now you can go to the IRS and seek recognition of your 501c3 status. It's important to note that what you're actually doing is seeking from the IRS recognition of your exempt status, because say you file, so you've created your organization, April 13th is the organization's effective date. You have your first official board meeting. We file the 1023 application seeking recognition on May 1st. Current lead times on a full 1023 application are 6 to 9 months. So we're looking at almost the end of the year into 2022. But that determination letter that says you are hereby recognized as a 501c3 organization will be retroactive to April 13th. So it will be the IRS saying, based on everything you've told us, based on what you've told us you're going to do, we agree with you that you are a 501c3 organization. So you'll operate as a 501c3 organization until the IRS recognizes you as such. So one note, I mentioned the timing on the full Form 1023 for small organizations and other organizations that meet certain criteria. There's a whole eligibility worksheet on the IRS website. You can file a 1023-EZ, which is, no surprise, a much easier application. Cheaper filing fee is cheaper. Attorney's fees are cheaper. Everything about it is faster. And the lead time on that is 2 to 4 months, so significantly faster. So again, using my time frame, you could be up and running with 501c3 status in hand by late summer if you're filing a 1023-EZ. So there are a bunch of eligibility criteria, as I mentioned, but the two that we most often look to are you anticipating $50,000 or more in receipts in your first 3 years, and will at any point during those first 3 years you have $250,000 or more in assets. So again, most of the time you're going to fall into that small category. If you fall into that under those thresholds, do make sure you look at the other criteria, make sure you're eligible. But if you are, this application is a significantly more streamlined process. So as we say here, once you get that letter from the IRS, once the IRS says you are a 501c3 organization, now you are a nonprofit corporation recognized by the IRS as a 501c3 public charity. And now your organizational income is exempt from tax. And you can proceed from there to seek donations. And Dave will talk about a little bit about business plans and how do you decide, how do you make sure that this is actually going to be a going concern that is going to merit 501c3 status. Okay.
And normally I would say that when we at Candid work with individuals, we get a lot of people that are interested in getting the legal elements of this. And we do have some resources I'll show you on our Candid website where you can go to get resources. Certainly the Secretary of State's office in the state of Ohio will provide you with additional resources on the legal elements of this. And we always do recommend, since we're not lawyers, we absolutely do recommend that you work with a lawyer when you get into this initial process. So most of the people that we talk to, we're also suggesting you work with somebody with some legal learning that can help you through the process. But what we try to talk about at Candid is the things that are outside of just becoming legally a nonprofit. There are a number of people that we work with that think, well, I've got a 501c3 certification and the IRS recognizes me, and that's enough. And all I have to do is sit around and wait for the money to roll in. And it isn't like that at all, of course. There's a lot to putting a nonprofit together that goes beyond just becoming legally recognized in the eyes of the state and the national government. So what I'm going to talk about are some of the things that we recommend that you consider as you move on. And some of them have a legal element, but many of them are simply, if you're looking at your organization, whatever you're doing from the outside, what are the things that and a person who wants to invest in it, that wants to give time or wants to give money to you, what are they looking at to understand whether you have earned that? So we do have a question of the legal elements that's come in through chat. I think I'm going to ask Alex to answer that now, since we're right there.
Sure, and I should have mentioned too, we do welcome questions throughout. If you're anything like me, if you have a question, just ask it now. Don't wait until the end, because at the end you're going to say, "I forget it. I'm just going to go on with my day." So the question is, once recognized by the Secretary of State, is an organization automatically exempt from sales tax, or is that a separate application process? And so the short answer is no, it's not automatically exempt from sales tax. So an organization is with the right form from the Department of Revenue, you have which you can take to Home Depot or whatever, Costco, and you are exempt from paying sales tax on purchases. But again, you have to have that form that says we are a 501c3 organization, and you give it to the vendor. But I also want to make one point, because I've had a couple clients that have been tripped up by this. An organization that happens to sell stuff, a thrift store, for example, that organization is not exempt from collecting and remitting sales tax on those sales. And so this is not a blanket sales tax just doesn't apply kind of situation. It is you have a limited exemption from paying sales tax on purchases made for charitable purposes, essentially for a event that you're putting on, or or soup kitchen kind of whatever it is that you're doing. Those kinds of in furtherance of kinds of expenditures will be exempt, again, using the form issued by the state.
Good question. And do please keep submitting the questions as we go on here. We will pause near the end and make sure that we get to as many of them as we can. So what I'm going to talk about is the plan for starting a nonprofit. And it is usually built around the three ideas of mission, vision, and values. And if you've started a nonprofit or you've been working in a nonprofit, you know that the mission is really the core of what's going on. The mission is what a nonprofit, as it's described here, this is what a nonprofit does on a day-to-day basis. If someone is curious, if somebody's on an elevator with you and they want to know what it is that you do, the mission is really what you tell them. What are we focused on? Who are we helping? And that's where the charitable element is always important to think about when you are doing nonprofit status, is that most of the people that are going to be talking to you and learning from you are not as concerned about you as a business or as a nonprofit, but more about the people that you are going to be helping and the work that you're going to be doing. So the mission tells the person that you are talking to, who are you helping, how are you doing it, and how do you do it? So, and where do you do it? So if I did a mission kind of off the cuff, I would talk about how we work with people in the city of Cleveland to ensure that they find the right information related to nonprofits and foundations. I could talk it out like that, and that's what I do day to day. Behind that, though, is a vision for the whole of the organization. And the vision generally is a way of thinking, what would the world look like if I completed my mission? If I was able to make sure a world where everyone can read, a world where there is no hunger. That's a vision. And that's the kind of thing that hovers behind the mission, that's often talked about. Some people have both a mission statement and a vision statement when they talk about their organizations, but it's held in the back because what it represents is the values of that organization. And when we talk to funders and we talk to donors, this is how you connect with people. You connect with people based on the values that your mission and vision basically embody. So I am interested in learning about you. I want to make sure that those values are set out very clearly. It's the way that if I'm running a foundation, I look to see, does this organization share the values of the people that we started this foundation with? And do they share the values? Can we support this? Will they do the work that we care about? And that's those three ideas, values, vision, and mission, are sort of the orienting elements of a nonprofit organization. If you can't make them clear, if you can't describe them in solidly, it's going to be very difficult to move forward. Certainly, some of them are required as you put your application for legal status together. But it's also required because you are telling always the story of your organization. You're trying to make sure that that story is clear to anyone who connects with you. There are nonprofits, you can probably think of them, large, well-established nonprofits have been around for years and years, the Boys and Girls Club, the Salvation Army, and you can remember what they do and what their values are because they're constantly reminding you of that. The other thing you have to think about when you are getting started, in addition to being clear within the people that are starting the organization about your mission, vision, and values, is what environment are you going to be working in? Specifically, who else in the area is doing the work that you're doing? Is there anybody? I mean, it's easy to think, well, there's a definite need that I'm responding to in the community when I think there's nobody else that's doing exactly what I'm doing. But I have heard many, many people come to me and say, there's no one doing what I'm doing, and they'll describe what they're planning to do, and I'll hear it and think, that's just like this other organization that I know about. It's important before you start putting your organization together to know what the world is like, what specifically your neighborhood, the service area that you're going to be focusing on. What is it like? Who's doing the work? Are there successful business models already out there that we might be modeling on? Are we being completely innovative, or are we duplicating something else? It's not a sin to duplicate other nonprofits. What is not recommended is to duplicate exactly what another nonprofit is doing. You may say, well, they just don't do it as well, but unless you can justify how you are different, what niche that you are going to be filling in. Well, they provide after-school programs, yes, it's true, but not in this area, not to this population, not this way. You have to be able to say, what makes you different? What makes you special? What makes you indispensable? Because one pushback I get from lots and lots of different funders is that, you don't want too many nonprofits. There's always people that just want to start a new nonprofit and they don't know what the world is in their area. We help people do this kind of research. GuideStar.org, which is part of the Candid team now, is a good place to learn about other nonprofits. You can look them up and find out about them. Another place I tend to go is the 211 service that United Way runs, because it's the first call for help service. If you call 211 and you talk to them about, you're trying to find out about organizations that do a certain thing in your area, they will link you to different nonprofits that may be duplicating what you do, that you may want to learn more about. So it's very important to know that information. That kind of environmental scan is part of the initial stages of planning a nonprofit, as is putting together your team. And Alex already talked a little bit about board members. Certainly, we could do a whole session just simply on finding board members. You want to find people that are committed, that are passionate about what you do. We recommend learning from the website boardsource.org, because BoardSource is sort of the national place to go for more information about recruiting board members and the different board member roles and why you should look for a particular type of board member. Essentially, you are looking for people in the early stages to do a lot of the work of the nonprofit. And so you want them to be committed. You're not going to pay them. In fact, you're going to be asking them to donate to your organization. So you need people that care about what you care about, that care about that mission, vision, and values that you have. And there are organizations, BVU is a great one in town, that helps match people with organizations, match people who want to serve on boards. I also recommend that you work with volunteer organizations. organizations that recruit volunteers for other nonprofits. These are good places to find board members. Also, the people that you already know, maybe they're your friends, maybe they've been closely connected to you from the beginning of this. We recommend that you try to identify other people, but think also in terms of who is not represented. It's a really bad scene to be creating a nonprofit organization and saying, we're going to serve the Huff neighborhood when no one from Huff or no one with a connection to the Huff neighborhood is going to be on your board of directors. A board of directors should be a representation of the public. And there's a lot of easy mnemonic devices to remember what makes a good board member. They can give time, talent, and treasure. That's one of the common ones that you hear a lot. And definitely you need people to give time. They're bringing a certain amount of talent and they're bringing some of their treasure to it. Board members usually come well before you start having paid staff members. But as you plan further, you may think about who are we going to be working with? Are we going to need, we're going to have a paid executive director. Maybe that's going to be the only staff member at the very beginning. Maybe there are going to be other staff members that are necessary, and maybe you need to hire consultants, part-timers. Most of the time when you're getting started and you're looking for funding and you're trying to build up the ability to run your organization, most places start all volunteer or nearly all volunteer. And it's over the course of time that they begin to expand and to begin to have enough funding that's reliable that they can begin to hire people. So don't go in expecting, well, I'm just going to write a grant and somebody's going to give me $100,000 to hire 5 people. It's not going to work that way because grants don't come like that. Grants are, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but an organization who's going to be giving you a grant is wanting to see how you've begun to build up your own self-reliance and your own financing. And as you do that, the role of your board members, the role of volunteers, the role of other people who might be helping you out is crucial. Other parts of the plan involve who are you going to be serving? And this is something that we teach in our proposal writing classes all the time, because this kind of driving force is what any donor, anybody who's going to be supporting you is looking at. They are going to be looking to see that you know the need of the community that you are responding to. I mentioned if you're starting an organization that's going to serve the Huff neighborhood, you have a board member or board members from that area because you want to make sure that you're getting the real message of what is the need in the community that you're serving. Whatever community you're serving, you have to know it very well, not just from what you read in the paper, but from input, from research. What is the specific need? When you say that there's poverty in your community, that is moving to other people. But the first question is, what do you mean by that? What community? Where do you draw the lines of that community? The more detail you have on who you're serving and why they're in need, the better it's going to be, and the easier it's going to be for you to plan. Planning means thinking about that need and then working to address it, working to put together a plan that has specific goals and objectives that you want to achieve throughout this. And some people organize this using what's called a logic model, where you get a clear sense of the need and the steps that you take to respond to it. I think that sometimes is the easiest way to see how to design a program that includes what you need it to include, does the activities that you need to do, and leads to the outcomes that you want them to. But in any sense of however you're planning your programs, you need to think, how am I going to, first of all, plan the project well enough to know how it's going to work to address the need? And then later on, how do I measure whether or not I addressed that need? If you do want to eventually bring in grants and additional funding and continued support from different sources, you need to think about that measurement of success at the very beginning. What does success look like, and how would I tell whether I'm reaching success? Well, we gave out 10,000 cans of food. That's great. It's wonderful to be able to count the specific things that you do, but how do you know you're making a difference to address the need that you're talking about? How do you know that those cans of food are getting consumed? How do you know how many people are getting that? Can you see an evidence that this is having on the community? Does it help with their nutrition? How do you measure success in a way that encourages other people to want to invest in that success? That's vital for putting together a nonprofit organization.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah, go ahead.
Two questions that have come in.
Sure.
Yeah, just answer them. First question was, I was under the impression that after filing the articles with the Secretary of State, we also have to register as a charity with Ohio separately. Is that correct? And the answer is yes. There are actually two different state offices. One is the Secretary of State. That's the entity through which the articles of incorporation are filed. And then you have to register with the state attorney general, which is the Consumer Protection Bureau in the state, and register to solicit charitable contributions from Ohioans and also to hold charitable funds. So, don't have to do it the minute you create your organization, but once you start soliciting money and once you start having funds in the bank, you have to register with the Ohio Attorney General's office. Again, an online application, and then there's a recurring renewal process that the organization has to go through. The other question that we got is the IRS is supposed to respond to an application for tax exempt status in 60 days, and you haven't received anything. One, I'm not surprised you haven't received anything. The 60-day mark is supposed to just be a simple acknowledgement, really just saying we got your application. Not going to get not going to get a response in that time frame. The statutory time frame is 180 days, not 60, so 6 months. And I will say anecdotally that I have not gotten the typical acknowledgements over the last year or so. The IRS has, to put it mildly, been a kind of a mess as it relates to the 501c3, really as it relates to almost all things tax, but 501c3, the exempt organizations division at the IRS has been really decimated by budget cuts and staff cuts. So the fact that you haven't gotten an acknowledgement isn't all that surprising. And one other note, and I check this frequently for clients that we filed applications, you can go on the IRS website, Google, where's my application for tax exempt status? And you'll find the current processing times. So if you filed an application, a Form 1023 application after October 13th, 2020, that application has still not been assigned to anybody to review. And that's really where the bottleneck is in that assignment for review. Because once it gets assigned to a reviewer, assuming that there's no problems, it's usually a pretty quick process, a couple of weeks at the most. If there are any questions or further follow-up, that agent will follow up with you and you'll go back and forth however long you need. But again, I mean, I've got a client that we filed one in November, and the client is understandably getting a little bit antsy, but there's still a month worth of applications before my client's application even gets looked at. So
that's pretty astounding, Alex. I know it was going relatively quickly in the past few years, but it's obviously not doing that anymore.
Yeah, it's true. And everybody asks like, what should we expect? And it's really difficult to say. I mean, I've had clients that have had them reviewed and approved in 90 days. I've got other ones that are going on darn near a year. And it's really the online application. The 1023 is an online application now. It started last year, became an online application. And for all of the faults with the application itself, I have seen at least a little bit more timeliness on the processing. One more question that we got, well, just to answer while we're on question answering time here. I was reading that filing the 1023 EZ is not a good idea for various reasons. If your organization falls within the monetary guidelines, so there are reasons why you wouldn't file the full, or why you would file the full 1023, even if you're eligible for the EZ. There are a lot of problems with the EZ, mostly that the application essentially asks the applicant to declare under penalty of perjury that they're doing everything right. And there's not any kind of vetting process by the IRS. And the IRS isn't looking to see that it's actually organized and operated for public benefit, that there's not private annulment, all those kinds of things. And it's really some summary type questions like, are you following all the rules? Check this box. And generally speaking, I would say that if you're eligible, you don't get like a different determination letter that's somehow tainted by the fact that you filed an EZ application. And so generally speaking, I've advised clients that if you are indeed eligible, that the EZ is probably the better way to go. But again, if there's any concern, whether as to your eligibility or to what getting a determination letter through that process rather than through the full 1023 process, you only get one bite at the apple. You're not going to refile your application later. So you certainly can file the 1023. You're not going to be wrong to file the 1023 application, but you're going to spend a lot more money and you're going to wait a lot longer. And so I've heard that same kind of advice that maybe you shouldn't file it, but practically speaking, if you're eligible, and you will be eligible for that 3-year period, I'm hard pressed to see a reason why you wouldn't take the easier route. Okay.
Thank you, Alex. And I'm going to continue on, but please do continue to send questions in through the chat on any of the elements we've talked about. Because we get so many questions about finances and fundraising, that is often what people are thinking about first. When you create a nonprofit and you like move through the basic legal statements, the next question is, well, where does the money come from? And if you start thinking about it in the wrong order, in this out of order kind of way, emphasizing that before you get your programs and your project and your need and your vision and mission, everything solid, it's going to be very difficult for you to raise money because the finances and fundraising are tied into what you're doing. You can plan different sources of funding. And for a new nonprofit, oftentimes what seems the easiest way would be to just write a grant proposal and get a grant from a foundation that could pay for everything, except that doesn't happen. Foundations are probably the hardest to immediately step in and begin to get funding from because they are looking very closely at the results, at your plan, at how well you've already established what you're doing. They want to make sure that you have a very, very clear budget and that you also represent different sources. You're going for diversity of funding. Most foundations will ask you, who else are you going to be getting support from for this particular project? Because they are very unlikely to give you all of the money that you need. Oftentimes, when you're a new nonprofit, you may not even be considered eligible by that foundation. They may have some other way. I know with the Cleveland Foundation, when you come to them at first, they may suggest that you go through Neighborhood Connections or some smaller grant program before you come and approach them. But you have to have a very clear idea as you move forward where you need to get the money from. And the idea is also to try to diversify and think about where all are the best sources of funding for my nonprofit. Foundations are not the top source of funding by any means for a nonprofit organization in the United States. It's individual funding and it's earned income that really support most nonprofits. So do you have a plan for soliciting funds from your board, from individuals, maybe events, before you start getting into some of the more formal grant proposals and requests, government funding, other sources like that? We do have a class called Introduction to Fundraising Planning that we run at Candid. That's a free class that you may be interested in finding out because it talks about all those different ways and helps to give you a way to plan your fundraising as you go on. But within all of that, you also have to keep track of what you're doing. The more money that's coming in, the more money that you're documenting. Of course, you have to document it for the IRS, but you also have to keep clear financial procedures and infrastructure. Just as a for instance, you don't want one person writing grant proposals, pulling in the checks, signing the checks, cashing the checks, and monitoring the account. That's a great way to make sure that somebody there's no checks and balances on that person, and bad things can happen. So having those procedures in place is also part of getting this together. There's some other elements that you think about when you do this. Of course, you're not just going to be doing your nonprofit and assuming that everybody knows about it. You have to get the word out to your community. You have to be able to reach out. And usually that means not just advertising and putting an ad in putting a Facebook page up or anything like that. It's partnering with other organizations that might be interested in what you're doing and partnering with organizations that share in a commitment to the persons that you are helping, the different populations that you're helping. How do you get the word out that way? What is your plan for keeping people informed? There are other considerations, like it's unlikely the funder, though I get asked this question a lot. It's very unlikely a funder is going to buy you a building. It's not the first grant that most organizations get. And if I wasn't asked it quite so much, I wouldn't even mention it because it just, it's not the way that people think. And oftentimes you work in a shared space environment where you then may be able to rent an office and get a larger space. But a lot of nonprofits start out of people's homes and start in smaller shared church basements, that kind of thing. Equipment, if you need special equipment for what you're going to be doing, you have to think about where you're going to get that and how you're going to acquire it. And sometimes that equipment, if you need cars and vans to get people here and there, you'll need special insurance also for the people that you're working with. You're working with kids, you need to make sure you have the right kind of insurance and coverage. All the other things that go into this are a lot of logistical, keeping track of things, keeping track of the people, structuring a human resources department, structuring a business to keep it ongoing as it grows. And then finally, there's all sorts of reporting that a nonprofit is required to do. You have to file that 990 in some form to report to the IRS about your status every year. It can be a very small form when you're starting out, but it needs to be filed regularly. And Alex has already mentioned about registering as a charitable organization. If you're fundraising in a particular state, you need to keep reporting on that. As you get grants, you have to make reports. There's a lot of paperwork involved in this. So we don't want to scare you, but there are other alternatives to this. If you're not going, and if you find that starting a nonprofit is a hassle and is something that's more than you expect it to be, there are ways to find service in the community. There's also ways to operate without actually becoming a nonprofit 501c3 organization. And I'm going to ask Alex to speak to fiscal sponsorship and some other options.
Sure, thanks, Dave. So as both Dave and I get a lot of these kinds of, we want to start a nonprofit organization, and it sounds like both of us take often the tact of, okay, I understand where you're coming from. Here's some homework for you to take away and figure out whether it's right for your organization. And so I'll talk about fiscal sponsorship in a moment, but I'll also talk about the other question mark here at the bottom, which is, so we're talking about 501c3 organization is exempt from paying tax on its income. Question I often ask when somebody says they want to become a nonprofit organization, public charity, 501c3 organization, I'll say why. And I don't mean to say it in any way other than like literally why do you think that would be helpful? Are you even going to have as an organization net income to avail yourself of the benefit of the exemption from that from tax on that income? If you're not going to have net income, all of these administrative challenges and transparency issues and governance issues, you may find you chafe against those on a regular basis because you said, no, I'm not even really getting any benefit out of this. Now, of course, 501c3 status, there is a sort of built-in credibility with 501c3 status. You get to say to the world writ large that the IRS has blessed the organization as a charitable organization, and that does have benefit. And there will always be a place for the true public charity, social service type organization. But I think increasingly, I've been doing this for about 10 years, and increasingly, really progressively throughout that time, the concept of social entrepreneurship, social enterprise has come to the fore, and think about like the Mark Zuckerberg and his wife, the Zuckerberg Chan initiative. They started, rather than starting a typical grant-making private foundation, started an LLC because they wanted to be freed from some of the limitations that a 501c3 that a private foundation would have. And a lot of times we end up, based on what the organization, what the plan is, what the goal is, what the appetite for the kinds of things that we're talking about is, sometimes it makes more sense to start a for-profit business, start an LLC that has a lot more flexibility, and can still absolutely be a socially conscious, mission-oriented kind of operation. And now in Ohio, we have benefit corporations, which is another corporate form that is somewhere in between a typical for-profit corporation and a nonprofit. It definitely leans more towards the for-profit side of things. But there are other options. And again, we're not here to scare you. We're here to hopefully give you the tools and to sort of think broadly about the approach that you're taking and why you're getting into it, to make sure that 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, you say, oh gosh, I wish I wouldn't have gone down this road. So let's talk about fiscal sponsorship. So fiscal sponsorship is a good way to incubate an idea. That's most often the situation that I've seen fiscal sponsorship employed in the real world. Fiscal sponsorship, often erroneously called a fiscal agency relationship. Fiscal sponsorship is essentially using an organization. It's a relationship between two organizations, or a relationship with an organization and a project which is nestled in that organization, whereby the sponsor, which is a 501c3 organization, can allow its 501c3 status to be used to benefit another organization. So situation that you'll see somebody who starts a new project, it's an unincorporated association, or it's a new nonprofit corporation, but has yet to file for 501c3 status. They enter into a fiscal sponsorship arrangement. The sponsor, so if Alex wants to donate to this new operation, but it doesn't have 501c3 status yet, it hasn't been recognized as such by the IRS, I can actually cut a check to the sponsor, which is a 501c3 organization, for the benefit of the sponsored project. The sponsor will issue me the typical donation receipt that says, thank you for your donation, and no goods or services were provided in exchange, and all the rest. And the sponsor has to make the decision in its discretion that sending that money that I sent for the benefit of that program, that it is in fact in furtherance of the sponsor's charitable purpose to then distribute the funds. And so that discretion, that pivot point at the sponsor organization is really what makes this work from an IRS standpoint. But if you find an aligned organization, mission-aligned organization that's been around for a long time, there's organizations like the Tides Foundation in San Francisco that this is all they do. There's another one in New York called Fractured Atlas, which is focused on arts organizations. But if you find an organization that is mission-aligned, and that organization is willing to incubate your idea or help you incubate your idea, maybe you spend a year in fiscal sponsorship mode, and if after a year you say, we're not really getting the kind of attention we thought we would, or we're not getting the kind of philanthropic support we thought we would, fiscal sponsorship, creating an organization and entering into a fiscal sponsorship arrangement is a lot less taxing. Sorry, shouldn't use that word. A lot less onerous than creating a new organization, filing a 1023 application, going through all of that process. So again, I think of it as a good way to incubate a new idea, or maybe it's an idea that never is going to have 501c3 status. It's it's time limited. It's only going to exist for a year or 2 years for whatever reason. I think this is also quite applicable in the arts world, because maybe it's a project, maybe it's a film it's going to take a year, which is a significant undertaking, but doesn't necessarily merit creating its own organization that, the way the documents are written, is going to exist in perpetuity. And so the fiscal sponsorship allows you to attract philanthropic support for that project without having to go through the full process that we've just talked about.
So in the last couple of minutes that we have here, I want to talk about the things that we've been going on about, which is essentially that there are benefits to being a nonprofit: tax deduction, tax exemption. You can get grants, and you have a formal structure that limits the liability of the people that are running it, because you are dedicated to the mission of that organization. However, there are many disadvantages that we've mentioned, some of which: shared control, which is if you create a board, the board is in charge of your organization, and all nonprofits have to be run by their board of directors rather than each individual. There's lots of paperwork. There's lots of scrutiny by the public. It is a public information. And the 990 that you file with the IRS is also a public document that anyone can look at any time. What we try to do at Candid is help you make the decision without telling you exactly what to do. And we have a tool called the Nonprofit Startup Assessment that I'm going to show you. I'm going to stop sharing right now, but it is at learning.candid.org. It's in our nonprofit startup section. I'll show you where that is. So I'm going to share my screen real quickly here and bring up bring up the wrong screen. So candid.org is our organization. I'm just going to go back to that beginning just to show you. So the easiest way to find this is going to candid.org, which is the main screen. And then at the top of every candid.org page, there's a little Candid at a glance. And when I click that, I can get immediately to Candid Learning, which is where we have basically the answers to all the questions we get asked, all of our training classes, and information about everything related to the trainings that we do. So if you wanted to review some of the things I talked about, you can go in here into the training section, but I'm going to show you in the resources section our nonprofit startup information. So the nonprofit startup information under resources is basically in two different parts. There is a nonprofit startup assessment. I'll tell you about that in a second. And then down on the bottom part of that page is resources by region. So if you're interested in starting a nonprofit in Ohio, it has links to technical assistance. It has links to legal support and legal resources. It has links to nonprofit associations that will help you out. It has links to state agencies. If you're looking for the most essential information for starting a nonprofit in Ohio or any state, you can find it there. But the other thing that we have here is something called the Nonprofit Startup Assessment. Nonprofit Startup Assessment is 75 questions. It takes about 20 minutes to complete, and it's free. All you have to do is register online. And you're able to go through and determine, are you ready to start a nonprofit given the human capital that you know about, the social capital, information on finance and volunteers and board, your knowledge of the market that you've gone to. There are 75 questions, and then you will get a ranking. You will be able to fill out all of these different sections and get a clear guidance from each of the sections on whether you need to learn more, and then it will link you to places where you can learn more about these things. Yellow, which will tell you whether you need some work. Looks like yellow is a little orange on my computer, but the yellow section. And then green, if you are on track and you are doing the right things that will take you forward. So I encourage you to take a look at this tool, Nonprofit Startup Assessment. It's free, it's downloadable. You can take it over time. You can retake it and see where you are at different parts of time. And then you can also see if you should move forward or where you could find the most useful information to get you to the place where you feel most comfortable. So this is a free tool through Candid. I'm just going to bring up the last slide again and see if there are any questions that have come up, anything that we haven't talked about. I know we're right pretty much at time. So I want you to know that if you are interested in learning more about what we do at Candid, or you're looking for some help in starting a nonprofit, you can email me at david.holmes@candid.org, or you can go to our candid.org website and just use the Ask Us link. Alex and Jessica, do you have anything to add at the end here?
No, just to echo that I'm also game for questions. If anybody has any, either now or after the fact, give me a call or shoot me an email. My email address is, I believe, in the earlier part of the presentation, but A Campbell, ACAMPBELL at sssb-law.com. And we do appreciate you all coming and participating in this session, which, as Jessica mentioned, is of perennial interest to our very philanthropic greater Cleveland community. And I don't have anything else to add, but other than just to say thank you again.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. Thank you, Dave and Alex. That was incredibly informative. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. Hope you learned something. We are going to be posting this video. It's live now on the bar's Facebook page. We'll also be sharing it on the pages that I just shared for CMBA resources, both Reach Out for Nonprofits, of which this is a program called Reach Out Live that we started a year ago, where we have a panel of experts talking on various legal issues of interest to nonprofit leaders and the attorneys who advise them. And then also the Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts, that's the one that's VLA. If you are an artist or an arts organization and you would like nonprofit help and they're seeking a pro bono attorney, or you would like a speaker to talk to your organization or give a presentation, we're always happy to help. I'm going to post my email address as well. Please shoot me any questions that you have, anything else that we can help you with. Our attorneys who are taking this CLE credit, look for that email from us for the survey so that you can get your credit. And thank you, Jennifer. Just saw your Q&A telling us great job. Thank you, Alex and Dave, for being here. And thank you, everyone, for sharing an hour of your time today. Have a good one.
All right. See you all.
All right, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.